Years before he became Hollywood's blue-eyed icon, Paul Newman learned a truth no man ever truly outruns. Because some wounds don't appear on the surface, they take root deep within. Stay with us and hit that subscribe button as we uncover the untold story of the man behind the legend. Those roots began growing long before fame, in a place that looked perfect from the outside, but shaped him in ways the world never saw. Shaker Heights was the kind of community built on order, neatly trimmed lawns, well-planned streets, brick homes arranged as if measured twice before being placed. And inside one of those beautiful, rigidly ordered houses lived young Paul Newman, a boy who often felt as though he was being sculpted rather than raised. From the outside, his world appeared flawless. A stable family, a respected business, an education that promised opportunity. But once you stepped through the front door, something shifted. Love wasn't absent, just quiet, reserved, measured. It wasn't spoken, it had to be earned. Paul's father, Arthur Newman, was a man of rules, sharp, practical, and disciplined to the core. He ran a sporting goods store, but he ruled his home with the same firmness one might use to run a factory floor. He believed in hard work and responsibility, in never letting emotions get in the way of achievement. Praise was rare, approval was conditional. For a sensitive boy, Arthur was a storm cloud that never quite broke, but never quite drifted away either. Constant, heavy, and quietly powerful. Paul's mother, Teresa, was his father's opposite in many ways, artistic, expressive, dramatic in her own quiet way. She loved beauty, music, decoration, the arts. She believed in refinement, in poise, in presenting oneself to the world impeccably. But her affection, like Arthur's, came with conditions: perfection, performance, elegance. Paul learned early that the quickest way to win her attention was to be impressive. Not authentic, not vulnerable, just impressive. And so the quiet boy began to grow in two directions at once. Inward, retreating into his thoughts, and outward, forming the beginnings of a mask he would wear for years. People who knew young Paul always described him the same way: polite, gentle, shy. Not shy in the careless way adults say about children, but shy in the deep way that comes from living on emotional tiptoe, always measuring, always adjusting, always trying to figure out what version of yourself is safe to show. He wasn't timid because he lacked confidence. He was timid because he lived in a home where quiet was safer than honesty. At school, he wasn't the loudest boy or the most noticeable. He was the observer, the one who watched how other boys laughed easily, how they spoke without fear, how they seemed to move through the world without this invisible question mark floating above them. Am I enough? Even then, young Paul sensed the distance between who he was expected to be and who he truly was, but he didn't yet have the words to describe it. He just felt other. Looking back decades later, Newman admitted something with the kind of honesty only age grants. I was always looking for identity, always looking for who I was. Most actors begin this search on a stage. Paul began his long before he ever saw one. His sense of self was slippery. He could mimic, he could charm, he could perform. These came naturally. But knowing who he was beneath all that was the battle. The world would eventually see Newman's charm, his cool confidence, his easy swagger. But those were skills, tools he learned early, not truths he was born with. Imagine for a moment a boy who felt things deeply, trying to live in a home where feelings were handled like fragile items, wrapped up, tucked away, never fully unboxed. His father valued strength. His mother valued perfection. Neither quite knew what to do with a sensitive kid who didn't yet know how to hide his heart. So he adapted. He learned to smile even when he was uncertain. He learned to speak only when he was sure he wouldn't be wrong. He learned the art of shrinking himself so he wouldn't disappoint anyone. And in this shrinking, something else quietly began to grow. The hunger to become someone that no one could ignore. That hunger was subtle at first, a small seed buried beneath layers of expectation. But it would shape him. It would drive him. It would push him toward stages, toward spotlight, toward the impossible goal of finally proving to his parents, to the world, to himself, that he was worth noticing. To understand Newman's transformation, you have to understand Shaker Heights itself. It was a town designed to be admired, carefully crafted, socially polished, proud of its reputation. The kind of place where everyone aspired to be successful, presentable, respectable. A place where appearances mattered. And for a boy like Paul, hyper-aware of how others saw him, This environment was both a training ground and a cage. He saw what perfection looked like. He learned how to imitate it. He learned how to shine just enough to blend in, but not enough to stand out. Not yet. But deep inside him lived a restlessness, a quiet rebellion that whispered, "There is more out there for you. There is something you're meant to become." He just didn't know what it was yet. Every so often, that hidden spark flickered. At school plays, his mother's eyes lit up not with maternal softness but with pride. She saw in him a kind of polish, a natural presence that others noticed. He wasn't the class clown. He wasn't the loud entertainer. But when he stepped on stage, something shifted. He became larger, clearer, defined. It was the one place he didn't feel like shrinking. But even then, he didn't dream of fame. He didn't imagine Hollywood or stardom or the iconic life that awaited him. All he knew was this. On a stage, he wasn't just Arthur's son or Teresa's project. He wasn't the quiet boy who disappeared in crowds. He wasn't the child who felt judged before he even spoke. He was someone. It was the first time he tasted identity, not borrowed, not expected, but his own. From an early age, Paul sensed that his parents wanted him to be remarkable, successful, outstanding, the kind of child who made other parents whisper, "Look at him, now that's a boy going places." And this expectation didn't fill him with confidence. It filled him with fear. Fear of failing, fear of disappointing, fear of discovering that maybe he wasn't special after all. That fear stayed with him for years. It shaped how he approached achievement, always pushing, never satisfied. It shaped how he approached relationships, careful, guarded, cautious. And later, it would shape how he approached fame, always doubting whether he truly deserved it. Paul Newman's early years weren't dramatic in the Hollywood sense. There were no explosions, no tragedies, no shocking events. But there was something more subtle, more powerful happening. A quiet internal battle between who he was and who he was supposed to be. This battle would define him. It would follow him into adulthood. It would influence every role he ever took, every relationship he ever built, every insecurity he ever tried to hide. Before he was a legend, he was just a boy trying to answer a question he didn't yet know how to ask. Where do I fit in this world? And so his story begins not with triumph, but with searching. Deep, restless searching. Searching that would lead him from Ohio's tidy streets to the chaotic world of theater, to the glittering heights of Hollywood, to the complex man behind the legend. But for now, he was just Paul, a quiet boy with a loud destiny, shaped by the silence of a home that taught him everything except how to be himself. Teachers noticed it before Paul did, the way he stepped onto a stage like he belonged there, even when he had no idea what he was doing. He didn't perform with the bravado of a natural-born entertainer. His acting came from something quieter, an instinct, a spark, a presence he didn't yet understand. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the boy who demanded attention. Yet somehow attention drifted toward him. When he delivered lines in school plays, something shifted. The shy boy from Shaker Heights suddenly became clear, focused, almost magnetic. He transformed, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because, for a brief moment, he could step out of the confusing maze of his own identity and simply be someone else. Acting didn't feel like ambition. It felt like relief. Still, even this early gift failed to give him the clarity he needed. Being good at something was not the same thing as knowing it was your purpose. Paul wasn't ready to call it a dream, and he wasn't ready to believe it could be his life. So instead of following that spark, he let it sit quietly in the background, one more possibility among many. What he did feel was restlessness, a pull toward what he didn't know. And in that uncertainty, the world suddenly changed. World War II arrived like a tidal wave swallowing his generation whole. Every young man faced the same question. What now? Where do I belong in this moment? For the first time, Paul couldn't ignore the ache inside him. The need to find direction, to prove himself, to step out of the shadows of expectation and become someone of substance. He was still barely out of boyhood. In many ways, he was still that shy child from the quiet house in Ohio. But the world didn't wait for boys to become men. War had a way of accelerating that process. So Paul enlisted in the Navy. Not out of patriotism alone, not out of bravado, but because he needed structure. He needed purpose. He needed a reason to get up each morning that wasn't tied to who his parents wanted him to be. He wanted to feel chosen by life. Instead, life gave him something far more complicated. Boot camp offered Paul what he had lacked for so long, a blueprint. Wake up at this time. Do this task. Follow this rule. Keep moving. For a while, it worked. The structure felt freeing, not restrictive. He didn't have to question who he was. He just had to be part of something bigger. Yet even in uniforms, that inner drift remained. He performed his duties well, reliably, quietly, efficiently, but he didn't feel the fire that so many young men around him seemed to have. War gave them meaning, a cause, a fierce sense of destiny. Paul felt none of that. He followed the path, but it wasn't truly his. Still, he pressed on, hoping that purpose would appear if he just kept moving forward. Then came the moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Paul was assigned as a radio man and gunner on a torpedo bomber, an aircraft used in dangerous low-altitude attacks. The job was not glamorous. It required courage, precision, and the acceptance that each mission might be your last. One morning, his squadron prepared for a flight. A routine assignment, nothing out of the ordinary. Paul, as usual, was ready to go, helmet on, gear checked, training sharp. But just as the crew was boarding, the commanding officer stopped him. He wasn't sick. He wasn't unqualified. Nothing was wrong with him at all. Except one thing. Paul had come down with a mild ear infection. Something so small. Something so human. Something that would ordinarily mean nothing. But on that day, that tiny detail mattered. The officer pulled him off the assignment. "Stay grounded," he said. "Doctor's orders." Paul protested. He didn't want to abandon his crew, but rules were rules. He stepped aside. The plane took off without him. He watched it rise into the sky, a silver streak lifting toward its mission. His friends were on it. The men he trained with. The men he lived alongside. He assumed he would see them at dinner. He didn't. The plane never returned. A mechanical failure. A crash. Every man on board was killed. Except Paul, the one who wasn't there. News of the crash hit him like a force he couldn't withstand. Shock came first, then confusion, then silence, then slowly an emotion far heavier than mourning. Why them's why not me's? No one could answer that. And the Navy, structured as it was, didn't provide space for questions like that. So Paul carried the guilt alone. At night, he lay awake, imagining the moments he wasn't there for. He replayed the scene of being pulled off the flight again and again. He imagined his crew sitting in their seats, preparing, unaware it would be their last mission. And every time he pictured it, the same thought echoed inside him. I was supposed to be there, I should have been there. The war continued. Life continued. But something inside him had shifted permanently. Paul had always searched for identity. Now he searched for meaning. Why had he been spared? What was he meant to do with the life he still had? He didn't know. Not yet. But the weight of that unanswered question settled into him like a shadow that never quite left, shaping him, humbling him, haunting him. When the war finally ended, the Navy discharged thousands of young men back into a world that no longer resembled the one they had left. People celebrated, flags waved, streets filled with relief and joy. But inside Paul, the celebration did not reach. He returned home with more questions than answers. He wasn't the boy who left Ohio. He wasn't sure he liked the man who came back. War had given him structure, but it had taken something from him too. His certainty, his innocence, his belief that life unfolded in understandable patterns. Now he knew it didn't. It twisted, it spared, it took, sometimes without warning. He walked through civilian life with a strange duality. Alive but haunted, grateful but confused, present but emotionally distant. People saw a handsome young man with a good future. They didn't see the inner storm. Paul rarely spoke about the crash, but those who knew him well noticed something had changed in his eyes. A quiet seriousness, a depth that hadn't been there before. It was the look of someone who had brushed against death and come back with questions he would spend years trying to answer. Despite surviving the war, Paul still had no roadmap for his life. The Navy had not given him clarity. It had given him responsibility, discipline, guilt, and questions, but no direction. He tried to resume a normal life. He tried to fit into the roles expected of him. But normalcy felt too small now. When he looked at the world, he no longer saw what was in front of him. He saw what was missing. He saw the people who didn't come home. He saw the randomness of fate. He saw the fragility of time. And he knew deep down that he couldn't waste the life he had been given. But he didn't yet know how to honor it. There were moments when he wondered, what if I was spared for something I haven't found yet? What if my purpose is still waiting for me somewhere? These thoughts weren't dramatic, they were quiet. Persistent, a whisper that followed him. And slowly, that whisper began pointing him back to the one place where he had ever felt like himself. The stage. Paul didn't immediately decide to become an actor. He didn't wake up one morning with a grand revelation. Instead, the idea crept up on him slowly, like a memory he had forgotten to remember. He recalled how the stage had once given him clarity, how it allowed him to shed the identities others imposed on him, how it let him step into a life that felt bigger, truer, freer. Acting was the one thing that had made sense before the war. Now it was the only thing that made sense after it. And so the dream, once quiet, shapeless, uncertain, began to take form. Not as a plan, not as a career, but as a calling, a compass, a direction, something he could move toward, even if he had no idea where the path would lead. Hollywood is a place that moves quickly. It scans faces like a radar system searching for the next star, the next fantasy, the next icon it can sculpt into something bigger than life. And the moment Paul Newman stepped into that world, the town reacted the way a crowd does when the lights suddenly come up on a stage. It inhaled. Here he was. The jawline chiseled like a statue from another era. The charm effortless. The smile both boyish and dangerous. And the eyes that looked illuminated, as if someone had placed a light behind them. Hollywood didn't just notice Paul Newman. It claimed him. Agents leaned forward, casting directors whispered, producers saw dollar signs. Strangers stared just a second too long, intrigued by the quiet young man who looked like he had stepped out of a painting. It was as if fate had picked him up by the shoulders and dropped him directly into the center of the dream factory. But inside Paul, there was no such certainty. Where the world saw perfection, he felt misplaced. Hollywood immediately decided what Paul Newman was. The new angel, the golden boy, the pretty face who had arrived to replace yesterday's heroes. It didn't matter to the town that he was still trying to figure out who he was as a man. It didn't matter that he hadn't yet healed the wounds he carried from the war. It didn't matter that acting for him was not a path of glamour but a search for something deeper. Hollywood doesn't ask who you are. It tells you who you are supposed to be. And it wanted him to be flawless. Paul's, however, the real Paul, felt like he was standing in the wrong spotlight. No one knew how much Newman doubted himself. He hid it too well, behind smiles, behind jokes, behind the calm, cool posture that the world swallowed whole. But inside, he was a swirl of uncertainty. He once confessed, "I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. Not on screen, not in my own skin." Those words were not dramatic. They were painfully honest. Paul wasn't sure he deserved the attention. He wasn't sure he earned the praise. He wasn't even sure he had real talent. He suspected people saw the face, not the person. The image, not the work. The fantasy, not the man. And that terrified him. Survivor's guilt doesn't disappear when you enter a new world. It doesn't leave when cameras turn on. It doesn't quiet down when fame arrives. It follows you. And Paul carried it into Hollywood like a silent, invisible backpack strapped across his shoulders. He couldn't stop thinking about the bomber crew he didn't die with. He couldn't stop questioning why he had been spared while better men, stronger men, braver men never came home. Hollywood celebrated him. But Paul wondered deep down, Why am I the one getting this chance? What did I do to deserve it? This internal wound made compliments feel suspicious. It made success feel accidental. It made praise feel like a misunderstanding the world would someday discover. To survive Hollywood, you need armor. Some people become arrogant. Some become aloof. Some become lost entirely. Paul crafted a different kind of armor. Coolness. He became the man whose buttons never popped, whose voice stayed even, whose posture remained composed even when his mind was. People called him mysterious. They called him confident. They called him effortlessly self-possessed. They had no idea the truths. Cool was simply the mask he wore to hide the chaos inside. The more the world adored him, the more Paul retreated behind that mask. Because behind it lived someone who wasn't sure he deserved to be adored at all. In his earliest films, Newman watched himself on screen and winced. He saw every flaw, every hesitation, every insecurity. Where others saw potential, he saw a fraud trying not to be exposed. He worked harder than most young actors because he felt he had something to prove. Not to Hollywood, but to himself. Every role became a test. Are you really good enough? Do you deserve this life? Or are you simply the pretty face they're letting stand in front of the camera until someone better comes along? Hollywood kept telling him who he was: handsome, gifted, charismatic. Paul's inner voice kept saying something else entirely. The battle between those two stories defined his early career. In Hollywood, audition rooms are pressure cookers. Everyone there is hungry. Everyone wants something. Everyone feels the eyes of the town watching them, judging them, ranking them. But for Paul, auditions carried something heavier. They reminded him he didn't yet believe he was worthy of being chosen. He would walk in, calm on the outside, trembling on the inside. The casting director saw poise. Paul felt panicky. What if he tripped? What if he forgot a line? What if they finally saw through the charm and realized he wasn't the miracle they hoped he'd be? Self-doubt shadowed every reading, every rehearsal, every callback. It was a quiet fear but constant. I am not enough. The town moved him upward quickly. Publicity teams crafted his image. Studios lined up scripts. Columnists praised him. He was labeled the rising star, America's new leading man. A combination of grace, heat, and danger wrapped inside a single human being. But as his career grew, a strange thing happened. The more famous he became, the smaller he felt. Fame amplified the gap between who he seemed to be and who he believed he truly was. Hollywood saw an angel. Paul saw a man who still didn't know himself. Hollywood saw perfection. Paul saw a survivor whose life had been a series of lucky breaks. Hollywood saw a star. Paul saw a boy from Shaker Heights. Still searching, still wandering. Still unsure of where he fit in the world. Newman feared that if anyone looked too closely, they would uncover the truth he worked so hard to hide. That beneath the cool exterior was a man stitched together with doubt, fear, guilt, and longing. He feared emotional exposure more than he feared failure. So he held people at a distance. He kept conversations light. He let others admire him from afar, but rarely allowed anyone to see the insecurities underneath. He once admitted years later, in a rare moment of honesty, the hardest thing to accept was that people saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. That sentence reveals everything. Paul Newman wasn't fighting Hollywood. He was fighting his own reflection. With each new role, the world grew louder. You're extraordinary. You're unique. You were born for this. Paul could memorize scripts. He could handle lights. He could navigate fame. But those voices, the praise, the compliments, the admiration, never fully entered his heart. To him, each success felt precarious, like a fragile structure that could collapse with one mistake. He wasn't afraid of losing fame. He was afraid of proving to the world that he had never deserved it in the first place. Hollywood didn't realize it, but Paul Newman was a man on the edge of a personal revolution. He was about to take roles that challenged him. He was about to meet people who changed him. He was about to step into films that forced him to confront the shadows he had long avoided. The doubt, the guilt, the insecurities. All of it would shape him into the actor he eventually became. But in these early years, he was still just a young man struggling to reconcile the image the world adored with the identity he had yet to find. And so, behind every smile, every iconic photograph, every moment of cinematic coolness, there lived a quiet question. When will I finally feel like I belong in my own life? By the time Paul Newman became a father, the world had already begun its love affair with him. His face filled theater screens from coast to coast. Magazines treated him like a national treasure. Reporters followed him the way shadows follow sunlight. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol of charm, of talent, of effortless American cool. But symbols are not people. And fathers, no matter how beloved by the world, still have blind spots. Paul Newman tried to be present. He tried to balance fame with family. But the truth was more complicated, more human. His life was expanding at a speed no ordinary person could keep up with. And in the whirlwind of interviews, film sets, premieres, and studio demands, a quiet, sensitive boy named Scott Newman was watching, trying to understand how his father belonged to everyone, and yet not always to him. From the outside, being Paul Newman's son might have looked like a gift. People assumed the name alone opened doors. They imagined privilege, ease, admiration. But the reality, especially for Scott, was almost the opposite. Scott Newman did not just grow up near fame. He grew up beneath it. Imagine being a boy walking into a restaurant with your father, and the entire room turns toward him as if gravity itself has shifted. Imagine fans squeezing past you, brushing your shoulder aside, as if you're air, as if the only person worth seeing, touching, or speaking to is the man walking 2 steps ahead. Joanne Woodward, Scott's stepmother, and one of the only adults who noticed the subtle emotional bruises forming, once said, "When the kids go anywhere with him, fans push past them as if they're nothing." She didn't say it with criticism. She said it with sorrow, because she understood something that Paul in those years did not. Fame does not just elevate the star. It can erase the people standing near him. Scott adored his father. He admired him, imitated him, studied him. Like many sons, he wanted to impress the man who seemed to command every room he entered. But Paul Newman, the father, was competing with Paul Newman, the legend. To the world, Paul was perfect. To Scott, he was unattainable. Everywhere the boy went, the questions followed. Are you going to be like your dad's? You look just like him, do you act too? What's it like having Paul Newman as a father? People didn't mean harms, but every comment carved the comparison a little deeper, etching it into Scott's identity like a permanent watermark. He wasn't simply Scott. He was Paul Newman's son, a title that sounded like a privilege, but often felt like a cage. As he moved into adolescence, Scott tried to find himself, to forge an identity separate from the famous shadow that stretched across his path. He tried acting. He tried singing. He tried performing stunts. He tried anything, really. Anything that might allow him to say, "Look at me. Say me. Not him. Me." But every time he reached for the spotlight, the world shifted it back toward his father. Casting directors saw echoes of Paul's face in the boy's features and expected the same brilliance. Music producers heard his name and made assumptions before he even opened his mouth. Journalists mentioned him only as an extension of Paul, never as an artist in his own right. Imagine trying to plant roots in soil that keeps shifting beneath you. Imagine trying to build a life that people view only as a footnote to someone else's story. That was Scott's reality. He was a boy trying to grow, in a place where another man's greatness had already consumed all the sunlight. Paul Newman never set out to overshadow his son. He never imagined that admiration could turn into pressure, or that attention could become a burden. He believed Scott was simply going through the ordinary turbulence of growing up. A rough patch, a season of rebellion, a wave that would eventually settle. He didn't yet see the deeper truth. Scott wasn't just wrestling with growing pains. He was wrestling with identity itself. Paul loved his children. But love, even deep love, doesn't always come with understanding. He saw flashes of frustration, moments of emotional struggle, a boy pushing against boundaries. And he thought, he'll grow out of it. It's a phase. He just needs time. But shadows don't wait for time. They grow quietly, steadily, while everyone is looking the other way. Scott Newman did not want to surpass his father. He didn't want to compete. He didn't want the throne of a Hollywood dynasty. He just wanted to be seen. Really seen. Not compared, not evaluated. Not measured against a man whose life had become a myth. He wanted someone to look at him and say, "Scott, you are enough." But life rarely gives children the exact words they need. And Paul, caught in the machinery of fame, scripts, deadlines, expectations, did not realize how deeply his son needed those words. Not yet. There were moments, fleeting ones, when Paul sensed something was wrong. A flicker of sadness behind Scott's humor. A withdrawal that didn't match the boy's usual spark. An insecurity that seeped through even when Scott tried to hide it. But Paul, who had spent his own youth swallowing insecurities and masking doubt with a cool exterior, believed resilience was a skill you learned by surviving hardship. He thought his son's struggles were temporary storms. He didn't see that they were becoming the weather of Scott's life. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't indifference. It was blindness, the kind that happens when a person is too consumed by their own battles to fully notice the battles of someone they love. Paul Newman had spent years fighting to understand himself, to silence his own doubts, to earn his own identity. He didn't realize that while he was searching for himself, his son was doing the same. But without the father's guidance he so desperately needed. Fame casts many shapes. For Paul, it became a platform. For the world, it became a fantasy. For Scott, it became a shadow, one that stretched across his childhood, his adolescence, and the years that followed. This shadow wasn't malicious. It wasn't intentional. It was simply the natural byproduct of a world that adored Paul Newman so intensely that it forgot to ask how that intensity might affect the people standing behind him. Paul couldn't see how heavy it had become. He didn't know how long Scott had been trying to step out of it. He didn't realize how deeply his son was struggling to build a life of his own. Not yet, because in the timeline of their story, this was the moment before understanding, the moment before realization, the quiet stretch of road where a father and son walk side by side, unaware that they are drifting apart. This was the calm before heartbreak, the silence before awakening, the shadow before clarity, the shadow Paul Newman never saw forming, until it was far, far too late. From the outside, the Newman household looked like a dream. A beautiful family, a handsome father admired worldwide. Success, comfort, opportunity, the kinds of things people pointed to and said, "They have it all." But privilege has a way of being misunderstood. It is not a shield. It is not armor. It does not erase the quiet struggles happening behind closed doors. And in the shadow of Paul Newman's enormous fame, his son Scott was fighting battles almost no one saw. He battled self-worth. He battled direction. He battled the crushing weight of a comparison he never asked for. While the world saw privilege, Scott lived inside a pressure cooker. And with every new success his father achieved, the temperature rose. The Newman last name opened doors. But behind each door, Scott found expectations waiting like judges. People expected brilliance. They expected charm. They expected the natural magnetism of Paul Newman. But Scott was Paul. He didn't have his father's steady confidence, or his ability to hide insecurity behind cool composure. He didn't have the calm exterior that made Paul look untouched by chaos. Scott was more raw, more expressive, more vulnerable. He felt everything loudly. He reacted intensely. He lived in extremes, which made him gifted in some ways, and fragile in others. He desperately wanted to be seen as his own man. Not Paul Newman's son. Not Hollywood royalty, just Scott. But everywhere he turned, the world held up a mirror etched with his father's face. Young people often search for escape when they cannot find belonging. Escape through adventure. Escape through risk. Escape through any door that lets them step outside the shadow they're trapped in. Scott tried acting. For a moment, it gave him visibility. But the comparisons haunted him like echoes he couldn't outrun. He tried music. He tried stunt work. He tried new friendships, new crowds, new identities. Each attempt whispered the same hope. Maybe this will make me feel like myself. But each door opened into the same room. The weight of being Paul Newman's son. Some escapes, unfortunately, led him toward dangerous choices. Not because he was reckless, but because he felt lost. Because when a young person feels they don't measure up, they sometimes chase distractions that numb the ache, instead of facing the ache itself. Scott wasn't flawed. He was hurting, and his hurt began to build towards something neither he nor his father could yet name. Paul Newman was not blind, but he was busy. He was adored by the world, pulled in 1,000 directions. Film sets, interviews, scripts, meetings. The machinery of fame demanded everything. But fatherhood demands everything too. And eventually, the two obligations collided. Years later, Paul asked himself questions that tore his heart apart. Was there a way I could have told him he didn't have to be like me? That single sentence reveals the depth of Paul's regret. He didn't just lose a son. He lost the chance to tell that son something he desperately needed to hear. You are enough. Paul wondered if he pushed too hard. If he wasn't present enough. If he should have held Scott closer. If he should have spoken differently. Listened differently. Loved differently. He wondered if his own habits, including the drinking he occasionally landed on, sent the wrong message to a boy already searching for escape routes. He wondered if fame itself had become a wall between him and the person who needed him most. These were not questions for an interview. These were questions a father whispered into the dark, when no one else was listening. In 1978, life delivered Paul Newman a blow so devastating that he would never again speak about fatherhood the same way. He received a phone call, a simple ring, a simple message, but it changed the architecture of his world forever. Scott, only 28 years old, was gone. The details were discussed by Hollywood, reviewed by journalists, speculated about by people who knew nothing of the boy or his pain. The world debated the cause. Reporters talked. Strangers shared opinions. Some spoke with sympathy. Others spoke carelessly. But none of that mattered. Because for Paul Newman, the only truth that existed was this. His son was gone, and he could not go back in time to love him the way he now wished he had. After Scott's passing, Paul Newman faced the kind of grief that does not soften. It simply changes shape. He didn't lash out. He didn't blame the world. He didn't point fingers. He turned inward. He asked himself the hardest questions a parent can ask. Did I see him clearly? Did I listen? Did I love him enough? Did he know what he meant to me? And in those private, painful moments, Paul Newman spoke a truth that revealed the deepest wound of his life. Many times I have gotten on my knees and asked Scott's forgiveness. This was not the confession of a celebrity, not the voice of a Hollywood legend. This was a father grieving the son he could not save, grieving the moments he wished he could redo, grieving the boy who had grown up in his shadow, without enough sunlight to thrive. This became the wound that shaped the rest of Paul's life. It softened him. It humbled him. It awakened him. He could not rewrite the past, but he could let it guide the man he wanted to become. And from that moment on, Paul Newman lived with a purpose forged from pain: to honor his son, to understand him, to make meaning from the loss, to never again overlook the quiet struggles of the people he loved. Scott's absence became the presence that changed everything. There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. For Paul Newman, losing his son Scott was that moment. It was the wound that stopped time, altered gravity, and reshaped the meaning of the word father. People saw Paul Newman as strong, composed, graceful under pressure. But grief doesn't care about grace. It does not bow to fame or fortune. It cuts through the armor, through the cool persona, through the public legend, and reaches straight into the private human being hiding beneath it. And in the painful quiet after Scott's passing, Paul Newman found himself staring into a mirror that reflected not the movie star, not the icons, but a man asking one impossible question. What do I do with a pain this deep? For some, grief is a storm that destroys. For Paul Newman, it became something else. A force he refused to let crush him. A force he attempted to turn outward, transforming his sorrow into a lifeline for others. He could not heal his son, but he could try to heal the world that had sons just like him. People who knew Paul said something changed in him after Scott's death. His voice grew quieter. His eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before. He acted with purpose, not performance. He did not talk publicly about his grief often, not because he was hiding it, but because it was sacred to him. In private conversations, however, the truth came through. He questioned himself constantly, wondering where he had fallen short. He once said, "If I couldn't save Scott, then maybe I can save someone else's child." This was not a slogan. It was not a line crafted for interviews. It was a vow, made not to Hollywood's, but to himself. A vow that would shape the rest of his years. In 1980, just 2 years after losing Scott, Paul Newman made a decision that surprised even those closest to him. Instead of retreating into privacy, instead of drowning in guilt or withdrawing from the world, he chose action. He founded the Scott Newman Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping young people understand the risks and pressures that had overwhelmed his son. He wanted teenagers to have information Scott didn't have. He wanted families to have conversations he once struggled to begin. He wanted to create support structures he wished his son had known were available. This was not Paul trying to be a hero. This was Paul trying to be a father. One more time, in the only way he still could. The foundation hosted programs, workshops, and outreach events. Educators, counselors, and families came together to build a community, focused on strength, resilience, and hope. Every new program felt like a small candle lit in Scott's memory, a light Paul wanted the world to carry on his son's behalf. The more Paul poured himself into the foundation, the more he realized something unexpected. He was healing not completely, but slowly, gently, steadily. Helping others did not erase the pain. Nothing could, but it gave the pain a direction. It turned grief into purpose. It turned regret into contribution. It turned heartbreak into a mission that outlived him. People in Hollywood began to notice this shift. He wasn't just an actor anymore. He wasn't just a star. He was becoming something else. A man determined to leave the world better than he found it. And from this evolution, another unlikely chapter emerged. A chapter that began in a kitchen with a joke. Paul Newman was many things. A husband, a father, an actor, a race car driver. But he was also surprisingly simple in some ways. He loved cooking. He loved sharing food with friends. He loved taking ordinary moments and turning them into laughter. One Christmas, he handed out homemade salad dressing in recycled wine bottles to neighbors and friends. It was meant to be a gag, a humorous little holiday gift from the movie star next door. But the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. "Paul, this is incredible. You should sell this. You could start a business." Paul laughed. A business? From a salad dressing recipe he mixed in his home kitchen. The idea sounded absurd, but the requests kept coming. And slowly, playfully, almost accidentally, a bizarre thought began to grow. What if we actually put this on shelves? Just for fun, just to see what happens. What happened was beyond anyone's imagination. Newman's Own launched quietly. A small experiment, a whimsical project, a why not endeavors. But from the beginning, something radical set it apart. Paul Newman refused to take a single penny of profit. Not 1 cent, not ever. Instead, every dollar earned, every bottle sold, every product expanded, every cent of growth would be donated entirely to charity. People thought he was joking. Then they thought he was naive. Then they thought he was impossible to replicate. But Paul didn't care. He wasn't trying to change business. He wasn't trying to start a movement. He wasn't trying to be admired. He was honoring his son. He was building a legacy for Scott that lived in generosity, not tragedy. Newman's Own grew. And grew. And grew. Soon it wasn't just salad dressing. It was pasta sauce, lemonade, popcorn, dog food, and more. A brand loved not because of the celebrity behind it, but because of the heart behind it. And as the company blossomed, so did the impact. Hundreds of millions of dollars, donated quietly, steadily, relentlessly, to children's programs, education, hospitals, camps, arts organizations, and countless causes across the world. Paul Newman didn't just give money. He gave hope where it was missing, light where it was dim, support where it was scarce. And he did it all with one thought in mind. If I couldn't protect my son, then let this protect someone else's. One of the most beautiful contradictions of Newman's Own was that despite the seriousness of its mission, Paul insisted the company stay playful. The labels were humorous. The marketing was fun. The brand identity was full of winks and jokes and lightheartedness. This wasn't disrespect. It was Paul's way of saying, grief can transform us, but it doesn't have to harden us. He believed healing required softness, humor, humility, generosity. He believed that giving could be joyful, not heavy. He believed that the best way to honor Scott was to build something that helped people smile at the very moments life felt overwhelming. And perhaps without realizing it, he was healing parts of himself too. To the world, Paul Newman looked untouchable. He seemed like a man made of sunlight and confidence. A man who walked through Hollywood storms without getting wet. Cool, controlled, charming. The kind of presence that made strangers feel like they knew him, even when they didn't know a thing at all. People projected onto him whatever they wanted to believe. Grace is certainty, perfection. But a projection is only a shadow cast on a wall. It reveals nothing of the person standing behind it. Behind Paul Newman's legendary coolness lived a man far more fragile, far more complicated, far more human than the world ever realized. He had a smile that disarmed people, and doubts that disarmed him. He had a voice the world trusted, and thoughts he didn't always trust himself. He held Academy Awards in his hands, but guilt in his heart. And every time a camera pointed at him, every time the world celebrated him, he quietly wondered whether the man being applauded was the man he actually was, or just the man he had learned to pretend to be. Fame gives a person a second identity, one you don't choose, one you don't control. And for Paul, the identity created by the world often felt like a costume, one made of charisma and certainty, coolness and control. But costumes get heavy. The public saw a man who had everything: a brilliant career, a beautiful marriage, a sense of humor sharp as glass, a reputation for kindness and generosity. They saw the surface. They loved the surface. But Paul rarely felt like that surface belonged to him. Underneath it, there were storms that didn't fit into headlines. There were fears that had nothing to do with movie roles or reviews. There were years of guilt he never fully knew how to speak aloud. He admitted later in life, "I never felt I truly deserved success, not the way people imagined." This wasn't false humility. It was the confession of a man who lived in two worlds: the world that admired him, and the world inside his mind. the one he struggled to navigate even when everything looked perfect from the outside. Paul Newman was a disciplined man. He worked hard, trained hard, studied hard. He lived with intention. He honored commitments. He held himself to standards no one else demanded of him. But discipline does not silence doubt. And self-doubt was an old companion, one that had followed him since childhood, through war, into Hollywood, and all the way into fatherhood. The loss of his son deepened it. It turned quiet insecurities into questions that echoed long after midnight. Was I a good father? Did I listen enough? Did I see him clearly? Could I have done more? These questions didn't leave him when he won an Oscar. They didn't leave him when Newman's own raised millions. They didn't leave him when the world called him a hero. They followed him everywhere. And in moments of exhaustion or loneliness, when cameras were gone and the applause had faded, he sometimes reached for anything that could quiet the storm inside him. Not to escape life, but to give himself a moment of peace from his own thoughts. It was never about rebellions. It was about silence. A momentary pause from the weight of being Paul Newman. Hollywood adored him. Fans worshipped him. Reporters described him in glowing, impossible terms. But his family, the people who loved him without needing him to be perfect, saw something else. They saw the fatigue behind his smile. They saw the heaviness behind his eyes. They saw the way he sometimes shrank into himself when memories or regrets pressed too hard. His daughter Clee later said, "He suffered in silence and it moved him to deep soul-searching." She didn't say this with judgment. She said it with understanding. The kind children gain when they grow old enough to realize their parents are not invincible, not flawless, not immune to pains. Paul wasn't hiding his struggles out of pride. He hid them because he didn't want anyone else to carry the burden of them. He believed suffering quietly was a form of protection, a way to shield others from the storms he couldn't control. But silence has a cost, and Paul carried that cost throughout the second half of his life. People used to say that Paul Newman looked like the kind of man who never doubted himself. But the truth was the opposite. His coolness was not confidence. It was self-defense. He learned early in life, in a strict childhood, in the Navy, on movie sets, in the face of personal tragedy, that emotions could be overwhelming. That vulnerability could feel like danger. That breaking open might mean not being able to put the pieces back together. So he built a mask made of calm, a mask of humor, a mask of ease. When he wore it, people relaxed around him. They believed the lie he projected, that he was fine, that he was stable, that he was the sort of man who never unraveled. But the truth was quieter, deeper, and far more human. He unraveled often. He patched himself back together privately. He covered the seams with charm so no one would notice. He carried guilt like a stone, pain like a shadow, responsibility like a second skin. And still, he showed up for the world, again and again. Every great performer learns to live in two realities. The one the world sees, and the one that lives inside the heart. Paul Newman mastered that duality more than most. To the world he was a movie star, a philanthropist, a gentleman, a legend. To himself he was a man searching for balance, a father trying to forgive himself, a husband trying to be worthy of the love he'd found, a human being wrestling with doubts that didn't care about fame. He once described himself as a man who spent half his life learning how to stop hiding. But hiding felt safer than being seen. Being seen meant vulnerability. And Paul Newman was far more comfortable playing characters than revealing the parts of himself he wasn't proud of. That contradiction defined him, and it made him real. Hollywood loves shiny surfaces. It loves certainty, glamour, charisma. It doesn't always know what to do with a man who is all those things, and also deeply, painfully human. Paul Newman looked like he had the perfect life. And in many ways, he did. A family he adored. A career he never imagined. A legacy of generosity unmatched in his industry. But perfect lives do not exist. They only look perfect when viewed from a distance. Up close, Paul Newman's life was a mosaic of triumphs and regrets, love and loss, purpose and pain. He was not a legend pretending to be a man. He was a man forced to become a legend. And in the quiet space between those two identities, he carried weight that Hollywood never saw. His family saw it. They lived beside it. They loved him anyways. When most people hear the name Paul Newman, they think of the movies. They think of the cool swagger in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The hungry defiance in Cool Hand Luke. The soulful danger behind those blue eyes that seem to glow from the inside out. But when time softens the applause, and the lights of an era finally dimmed, what remains of a man is never the work he did on screen. It is the imprint he left on the world. And for Paul Newman, that imprint runs deeper than film, deeper than fame, deeper than the legend the world crafted around him. He left behind something more powerful, more enduring, more humans, a philosophy shaped not by victory, but by heartbreak, a map of how to turn grief into compassion, a belief that goodness matters, not because it is noticed, but because it heals. Paul Newman did not wake up one morning and decide to become a symbol of generosity. His charitable empire did not grow from wealth or obligation. It grew from something much more fragile and much more universal. Pain, he once said, the pain doesn't fade, you just learn to live beside it. Most people learn to live beside pain by shrinking around it, by protecting themselves, by building walls that keep the world at a distance. Paul didn't. He let the pain change him, shape him, expand him. He studied it like someone trying to understand a language. He never expected to learn. And once he understood it, once he saw how grief can break a person, or open them, he chose the harder paths. He chose to open. When he lost his son, the world expected Paul to disappear into privacy, to grieve quietly, to retreat from public life. Instead, he did something extraordinary. He stepped forward, not as a celebrity, not as an icon, but as a father carrying a wound. He refused to let become meaningless. He created programs for young people. He built foundations for families. He funded counselors' camps, educational outreach. Anything that might help someone else's child navigate the storms his son could not escape. These were not publicity projects. These were love projects, grief projects, legacy projects. Each effort said without words, "Scott, I couldn't save you, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to save someone else." This was the quiet heroism that defined his later years. Not a heroism on screen, but a heroism in spirit. And then there was the strangest piece of his legacy. The part no one saw coming. A salad dressing, a joke gift, a kitchen experiment, a bottle passed around to friends at a holiday party. From that small, ordinary moment, grew a company that changed philanthropy forever. Newman's Own became a global brand. But Paul never treated it like a business. He treated it like a promise. All profits, every dollar would go to charity. Forever, not because it sounded noble, not because it looked good on paper, but because in his heart he felt that giving away what he built was the only way to make meaning from the loss he carried. Hundreds of millions of dollars flowed into communities across the world. Homes were built, meals were served, hospitals received funding, children attended camps that healed their spirits. Families who struggled in silence found themselves suddenly seen, supported, uplifted. All because a grieving father wanted to turn sorrow into service. Paul Newman never announced his good deeds with the loud confidence of a celebrity. He didn't want applause. He didn't want statues. He didn't want people to label him a saint. He believed in anonymity, in quiet generosity, in doing good because it mattered, not because it made headlines. When journalists asked why he gave away so much, he shrugged and said something simple, almost childlike. It just seemed like the right thing to do. That was Paul, a man who did extraordinary things, without ever pretending he was extraordinary. Pain did not make him bitter. It made him careful. It made him thoughtful. It made him awake. He learned that loss can hollow a person out, or it can carve new space inside them, where compassion can grow. He knew the world saw him as a legend, but he also knew legends are simply people who survived enough storms to discover what really matters. And what mattered to Paul was never the fame, never the awards, never the prestige. It was the work done quietly, the lives changed invisibly, the promise kept faithfully, to honor the child he lost, by helping the children he could still reach. Today, Paul Newman's face is printed on millions of bottles, on shelves around the world. But the true legacy is not the image. It is the impact. Families healed, young people protected, communities strengthened, dreams funded, hope restored. He proved something rare. That grief can be transformed. That compassion can be louder than fame. That heartbreak can become a blueprint for changing the world. Paul Newman was a movie star, yes, one of the greatest who ever lived. But his greatest role was not played on film. It was played in the quiet, invisible corners of life, where kindness matters most. His true greatness came from something deeper, a broken heart that chose again and again to heal the world instead of hurting it.